for you? In other words, from a competitive standpoint, what does your market look like? I know in California, many of the markets in California, only about 11% of the people who live in California can afford to buy. Is the same true in Oregon?
Sorry about that, D. I was topping off the coffee pot.
No worries. No worries.
What the market conditions? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, no. So I'm asking more specifically about affordability and the economics around affordability in Oregon. I know in California, only about 11% of the people who live in California can actually afford to purchase in California. Are you experiencing a similar dynamic?
No, they all come up here.
No, that was the perfect answer.
That's a great question, D. I don't know where exactly that is. I know that'd be a good thing to look up, but I know it is a bit easier than the California market.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, many markets are like that, but I mean, when you think about it, that's an incredibly alarming statistic that, literally only about 11% of the people. And so California is a state of about 40 million plus or minus.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, when you're talking about 10, 11%, you're talking about roughly 4 million people in the population. And obviously, so statistically, it used to be that what you needed roughly $100,000 of gross income to buy a $400,000 property.
Right.
So, actually understanding the median income range, what the industry is in the markets that you work is a critical skill. When we talk about communicating, so the other day we kicked off a lot with our value proposition and how do we articulate that. Again, being as I was at a broker summit last week, meeting with brokers from around the United States, it was interesting to really kind of talk about how other states felt. And something that I did not know, and I'm surprised I didn't know, but I guess I can't know everything, is there are 13 states that have been using the buyer broker agreement for years. So they've had no issues with, kind of navigating through the consultative experience with their buyer, articulating their value, and then discussing compensation. And I think that's the biggest issue that many agents are having is they're being introduced to a new skill. They're being introduced to a process that they're unfamiliar with or they've never had to navigate as a result of, buyers were that type of customer to where it's just like, okay, let's go look and let me check the MLS to see what I'm getting paid. So there really wasn't a depth of conversation that needed to exist, even though there always should have been. So as we kind of start to look at things, how we can best communicate with our customers so that it creates brand loyalty, it creates a commitment to you and your service and what you provide, and it creates a level of accountability that's mutual between you and your buyer. I'm assuming that everybody who works with a buyer creates some kind of accountability plan. There's this old adage that I absolutely hate. I've heard it for almost 30 years, which is buyers are liars. That is one of, I don't know why it sticks in my craw, why it's a thorn in my side, but I submit that buyers are not liars. It's more about the practitioner not giving them enough information to make an informed decision, right? Again, because of the ease in which we engage a buyer in a relationship kind of dynamic, we don't ask a lot of questions. Therefore, there's not a lot of understanding of what we are actually offering or bringing to the table for that particular buyer. So because of that, that leads us to make broad assumptions as to what the depth of the relationship actually is with the buyer. So if we're telling the buyer very little, or if we're doing things like I discussed the other day, which is putting them on auto campaigns and things like that, and having very little involvement in doing a less than concierge service, of course, a buyer is going to look around and think there's got to be something better than this. There's got to be something more offered to me than this. And that's where that statement, I believe, was generated, buyers are liars, is because the buyer's looking for an experience in addition to the service, right? That's where, that's part of that justification of how we get paid. We take care of you. We don't make you work. That's not our job. Why would you want to take on another job, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer? It's more about us providing that 5-star concierge experience to where the buyer is literally doing very little other than what you prescribed for the buyer to do, which is part of that mutual accountability thing. And usually it's no more on that accountability thing than I need you to drive by, look at the exterior of these 3 properties I sent you, so that tomorrow when we go and see the interior, we can make a decision and write an offer on one, right? And that's that kind of conversation that should be had each and every time you're working with a buyer. For this group specifically, who has had a buyer that they've worked with for, let's call it 3 months? You can either unmute or put it in the chat. Who's worked with a buyer for at least 3 months? Anybody work with a buyer for at least 6 months? How about 9 months? Right? And it's a matter of right up front collapsing what that communication tree looks like. See, that's the danger of showing more than more properties than are necessary, is because buyers begin to get house blur. I mean, have you ever had to make a decision and you're given so many options, right? You're like, here's a blue one, here's a red one, here's a long sleeve one, here's a short sleeve one, here's a no collar, here's a collar, here's a French cuff, whatever it is. You're given so many decisions that it's all the above. Exactly. Oh, 2 years. Ouch, Ashley. You're given so many options that you start to experience a type of paralysis. It's like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. Let me come back to this. That's the thing. Same thing that happens for buyers, is we give them too many choices and we don't isolate exactly what they're looking for. And it's not a fault of anybody per se. Again, it's about how the relationship is developed initially. And because relationships are typically developed in a very casual laissez-faire kind of a scenario, of course, we know very little about the buyer. And the buyer is going to continue to dream and dream big, right? Oh, well, let's look at this, because they're thinking, if I'm spending this much money, I want to make sure I'm getting everything I can possibly get. So let me ask this question. How many of you have let a buyer know this may not be your forever home, but let's get the process started? Anybody ever let a buyer know that directly? This might not be your forever home. I can look back at my very first car. So I'm going to use a car as an example. I'm a car geek. I'm a car nut for sure. Go to car shows as often as I possibly can. I own classic cars. I love cars. I think they're a work of art in many respects, as do many people. My first car was a POS. If you guys know what a POS is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My first car was a POS, but it was my POS, and it got me everywhere I needed to go, right? It wasn't pretty. It wasn't, the seats wiggled. There were all kinds of things that were wrong with it. I'm old enough to have had a roll-up window car. So it was just like but it was my car. It got me to where I wanted to go. It did all the things. But I knew that wouldn't be the car that would take me to the end of my life, right? That was a stepping stone of a car. I paid $400 for that car, $400 well invested, all of the above. The same mindset is true as we're starting to work with our buyers, even our move-up buyers. It's about management of expectation. And I'm not telling you guys anything new. But as we're looking at this changing landscape and we're going through this period of adjustment, or this recreation of the industry we've known for a period of time, and I use that word liberally, recreation, because as I said the other day, lots of things are going to change. It's impossible for a mass amount of change to not happen. It's going to be virtually impossible to have a business as usual. And what I mean by that is business as we've known it in the past, because of such radical changes. So as we look to dive into a new landscape, we know that anytime we cross a threshold or a barrier that has been previously unseen, there's lots of opportunities for it. Lots of opportunities for it. So some of the things that we can address are a natural contraction of service providers in the market. So you're going to see a number of licensees say, see ya, I'm not doing that. Can't handle that. Don't know how to do this. I was already having a difficult time to begin with, and now you want to throw this thing at me, right? So we're going to see a natural contraction of underexperienced or just bad actors leaving our ranks, which creates an opportunity all by itself, because that's a kind of more for me mentality. So, oh, those guys are gone. Oh, right on, more for me, right? So, the other conversation is again about money, and how are we going to have what seemingly feels like a difficult conversation. So at the top of the hour, I mentioned that certainly in California, only 11% of the people who live in California statistically can afford to buy. Todd, what market are you in? I mean, what state are you more specifically than individual market?
I'm in California as well.
You're in California as well. So, are you Southern California, LA area?
Orange County, yeah, Southern California.
Orange County, of course. Orange County is probably less. I mean, there are markets in Orange County, even Anaheim, Stanton, Cypress. All of those areas have radically changed from a price perspective, and those used to be low dollar. I don't know. I don't mean to make that sound insulting, but they used to be more opportunities at affordability in markets.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Right. So, but I mean, now everything has changed. And so again, the expectation from a buyer to their practitioner that they're going to be directly paying is going to increase exponentially. If I'm actually having to write the check, then you better believe I'm going to ask you for every service you can possibly provide. So who's had an opportunity either naturally in your business or recently as a result of some of the proposed changes to outline exactly what you do for a buyer? Anybody had an opportunity to do that? So let me share this. I shared this the other day. So at the broker summit, one thing that was very interesting, and why won't this click out? One thing that was very interesting at Broker Summit was kind of how they shared data. So it wasn't necessarily the content of data that was so striking. It was kind of how they shared the data. Some of it was very truncated, meaning the fact that NAR itself, and this stands to reason, was doing a fair amount of damage control. It's natural for the third largest trade organization that we've been, paying dues to for years, no matter how long we've been in the business, would try and do some damage control. And that damage control is based on the fact of, again, natural contraction of members. There's the forcing event of exodus of members. In other words, those who several companies who were a part of the lawsuit, the Kansas City lawsuit more specifically, because there are multiple copycats, but several of the members of NAR, including franchise owners, franchisees, large companies, their parent company said, hey, look, you're not doing us any favors. You're kind of screwing us over. We're out. And they mandated their company-owned shops and to withdraw from NAR, and they also strongly advised their franchise owners to also follow suit in terms of saying, hey, what are these guys giving us? Now, there could be a significant retraction because, again, anytime there's change and the amount of money that's being proposed and the continual fight with the Department of Justice may cause additional changes. So time will tell in some respects, but you've got that contraction of those members. So we may be left somewhere in the neighborhood of 7, maybe 800,000 members in NAR. Right now, there's about 1.5 million members in NAR, which is one of the highest amounts we've seen in terms of realtors. Keep in mind, across the United States, there are other realtor trade organizations. There's Realtist, which is predominantly Black realtors. There are folks who don't subscribe to a board at all and are just real estate agents. But roughly the core of our industry are members of NAR, or at least a secondary member of something like Realtist. So with that being said, and the contraction of members, and the forcing event that buyers may be responsible for your compensation, obviously how we communicate that event, or how we communicate what our product and service is, becomes even more critical. Let me find a particular document that I'm looking for. There it is. And so when we're talking about how we communicate, let me ask questions. I'm just going to ask questions during this. I'm going to skip around if you don't mind. How are most of you communicating with your buyers? First of all, has anybody heard of a pattern interview? Everybody familiar with what a pattern interview is and how it functions, how it works? Anybody not familiar with a pattern interview?
I've never
I
heard
have
that.
not.
I haven't heard that.
Never heard of it. Okay. So a pattern interview is a systematic way of eliciting information necessary for you to provide a scope of work. Most of the time, like I said, we meet a buyer, somebody comes to us casually and says, how's the market? Market's great. Hey, listen, I'm curious about 1234 Main Street. Do you think you could show me that property? The first part of that was a casual conversation. How's the market? The second part of that was less than casual, which is how we normally create agency. Oh my God, you want to see a house? All right, we've already established agency now. And the problem with that method of communication is there's no discussion of compensation, zero. Because again, before we predicated everything on we're getting our monies from the selling party or the listing agent or the seller. And so we didn't have that conversation, or we didn't bother to have that conversation. What a pattern interview actually does is it allows you to set expectations. It tells the buyer exactly what you plan to do, what you're looking for from them, and then it asks very detailed questions about what the buyer's looking for so that you can create a process of accountability. Accountability is everything when you're working with a buyer, which is why I asked, who's worked with a buyer 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years in Ashley's case? Sometimes it's a condition of the buyer just flat out not having money, but having the desire to buy, and they know in 2 years' time, they'll either graduate college or they're anticipating a promotion, things like that. Or maybe an inheritance from somebody who might pass away. There's a number of different things that could occur that would cause us to work with a buyer for an extended period of time. Guys, excuse me for 1 second. Ela, can you just chat real quick? I have an emergency call. Give me 1 second if you would.
You're all good. Hi, everyone. How is everyone doing today? Dee had an emergency call, but I just want to check in on everyone and see what are some of your, I guess, what is everyone's biggest pain points right now? Is we can kind of talk through what everybody is experiencing in their respective markets and see if we can have any advice, solutions, masterminding going on in the meantime while Dee is preoccupied. Hi, Joe. I don't know if we have had the chance to make each other's acquaintance yet. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. Yeah. I was gonna say, I think my biggest pain point in this that I'm looking forward to hearing how people are handling is those buyers that come in to say, look, I get it. Like, I'd love to work with you, but I'm not gonna put up a buyer's agent commission. So, and that just handling that objection. I know it's consistent across the board. We're all dealing with it, but I think that's kind of the part that I'm looking forward to hearing more about.
I think for that, one of the things that we talked about is just really driving home your value proposition. And I know that sometimes that's easier said than done too, but really being able to articulate to the buyer, this is a service that I am providing you. It's a service like anything else that you're going to find in today's market, but these are the ways X, Y, and Z that I provide a more specialized experience for you. Now you could go elsewhere, you could deal with another realtor, but this is exactly what I am willing to do for you. And this is the value that I bring to the table. And it may look differently for everyone, but I think really just driving home that script and really developing your niche value add is going to be one of the best ways to work around that. I know we're going to be doing a few scripting sessions coming up in May too. I know Dee is going to be leading some of those. And so in addition, let me see what else is coming up in the month of May. We're going to be doing more on lead gen always. I know that is always just going to be very prevalent for you guys, nurturing your leads to increase conversions, risk management, things like that. So just consistently wanting to bring you guys topics that adds relevance and value to, so that you can take that back to your clients as well. Hi, Mara. What's up?
Hi, Ela. How are you? Hi, everyone. I am an onboarding manager with Radius. I've been here for about a month. I was curious to know if anyone on the call has actually been using buyer broker agreements already. I know some of the agents that I've worked with in the past, that was already part of their process, and they had an entire buyer presentation and consultation and all of that before they started working together. And so that was already part of their process. I primarily worked with agents in California where I don't think it's been a requirement, but it was part of their practice. So it's just curious to know what has worked for folks who have already incorporated the buyer's agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually introduced to the buyer broker agreement in Berkshire Hathaway in 2011, and we were the first brokerage in Portland that I knew of to use them. And then we were also including a transaction fee, which hadn't been used in Oregon yet. So, you know, so that part of it, that process, like that, I was introduced to that pretty much right away in real estate. So that, you know, that initial consultation part, I mean, like I won't work with a buyer if they're not willing to meet with me first, either in person or on a call. Yeah. I won't show them a house because that's my process of elimination, because if they won't jump through that hoop, then we're never going to get through the process. Right. So I've used buyer broker agreements plenty. I chose not to in my business just based out of how my strategy of working with people, but I don't see that being a difficult thing. I think in my market, we see a lot of double ending transactions and buyers going directly to listing agents. So, you know, I'm going to be interested to hear how California agents have already handled that, because obviously it's been a thing for a while. So, I don't see it as, you know, too hard of a thing to overcome, but that's kind of the side where it'd be interesting to learn more about that, you know, how that's.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Dee, sorry, while you were off, I was just curious to know who has already incorporated the buyer, if anyone on the call had already incorporated the buyer's agreement into their relationships, and if they worked that into their initial consultation and presentation and meetings with the clients. I know some of the agents that I had interviewed about this process, they look at it as a contract. You know, it's a contract between.
It is a contract. It's an agreement,
and it's a commitment for you two to work together for a period of time, and it protects both of you, which I thought was a really interesting point of view. Anyway, you're back, Dee. Floor is back to you, but I was just kind of curious to hear some feedback from folks on the call.
Yeah, no worries, Mara. Thank you for that. And you know, absolutely.
Love you too, sweetie. Have a great day.
You too, sweetie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. No, it absolutely is it's no different than a listing agreement. It's a bilateral contract that's meant to show a commitment between the two of you. Each one of you have mutual promises. In a listing agreement, the seller agrees to pay you, and you agree to do detailed marketing services to move the property off the market. Same is true with the buyer agreement, particularly the agreement in California, which is the BRBC. It's a commitment that says, Mr. Mrs. Buyers, these are the things I'm going to do for you. In exchange, I will be receiving compensation from you, or in part from you and in part from the seller. And it needs to be defined by a dollar amount. It has a definite beginning and end date. A unique thing about this buyer agreement, it can be solely for one property. It can be for a zip code. Although I wouldn't advise it for a zip code, because a zip code can be pretty big, you know, especially in California. So it might be best to define it by market area, things like that. But it has definite places to really spell out the terms and the scope of work you plan to do for a buyer. And again, by establishing commitments, it allows for a better working relationship. Please, Todd, go ahead. Sorry, I had to jump out real quick, guys. I had an emerging call, so I apologize for that.
So the one thing I want to say is my biggest objection is I tend to work with first-time home buyers.
Absolutely.
And they don't like the limitation of only I can show them properties in a certain area.
Mm-hmm.
That is the biggest issue, or pushback that I get is, what first of all, the contract, and then being restricted to.
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to address. I know.
Great question. You know, that's a great question. That's why I started to talk about the patterned interview. So let me reverse this a bit. What if you were working with a seller and the seller said, "Hey, Todd, I like you, but the limitations of just you marketing my property don't make me feel right about this. I don't necessarily want to sign a contract. You know, hey, if you can bring somebody to the table, excellent. You know, otherwise, I'm going to keep my options open." It's kind of like a bad date, right? It's like, yeah, I like you and we can hang out, but I want to continue to see other people because I'm not sure about you, right? That's essentially what the buyer's telling us, if you think about it in that way. And where the pattern interview comes in, which is it addresses or allays both of those fears or concerns. That pattern interview starts off with, and I'm just going to use you as my example, Todd, is you meet with the buyer and you say, "Hello, Todd, how are you? I'm D. Wilmore. I'm with Radius. Thanks for taking some time to meet with me today. I wanted to go over a few things of what you can expect from today. And the ultimate outcome will be, we'll decide if we want to work together. If we don't want to work together, no harm, no foul. At the very least, I'll be able to understand and ascertain specifically what you're looking for, explain to you how I work, and we can come to an agreement at the end of that. Would that be okay, Todd?" And that's kind of how you start off your conversations. That's how all of any consultative experience should start off in that way. Because it allows for a breadth of information to be summarized and communicated to the buyer. And then it also defines expectations of what's going to happen during that meeting and what the resolution would look like. So we're going to be using that approach more and more and more, because the one thing is true, is the fact that we're going to have a buyer sign an agreement for any property shown prior to that property being shown. So the more we can bolster our experience and our expertise on how we introduce the messaging to the buyer, the easier the process is going to become. So in that pattern interview really is a step-by-step thing, and it outlines exactly what you need from the buyer. You start off and you're asking permission all along the way, which is a type of involvement. So the way human behavior works, anytime you can involve someone in a process or engage them or give them a task, they're more attentive to that process, and they're more committed to that process, because that's the way we learn. We're given a task, we focus on the task, and we look for validation at its completion. So that's the same behavior that we impart to a buyer. Is we begin the conversation with, just kind of as I outlined, the definition of expectations, who you are. And by the way, that's a script that all of you should get comfortable and familiar with, because it also communicates your level of professionalism. I'm going to translate that into medicine. So imagine, your doctor not introducing themselves, not telling you what they were going to do for you, and they just started touching you. You're just like, what's going on? Who are you? Why are you touching me? Why are you touching me there? What's this about, right? You don't have an understanding or an expectation. But a doctor goes through a multi-stage process. They gather history, right? They themselves might not gather the history, but they may have an assistant or a nurse do the gathering of the information, to get a historical perspective of what may be going on with you. They'll define, do you have any conditions, or are you predisposed to anything? So they do information gathering before they attack the problem or even address the problem. We tend to address the problem without understanding what the problem is, or if there is even a problem. And then we try and provide solution to an unknown problem or an under-communicated issue. So that gathering of information, how long have you been looking? Is it just you buying? What do you do for a career? How much money do you make? Do you have any money saved? Do you have access to other funds? That fact-finding, that exploration of. And I know the argument, and I've heard this many times. Many people say, well, that feels very invasive. You're asking them about financial information long before there's a true relationship that's solidified. But again, by giving the framework or giving an outline or a summary of an outline as to what they can expect during the interview, the process goes smoother. And you're asking permission, particularly when it comes to financial information. Todd, I know this may be difficult, but I'm going to ask you a few questions about your finances. Would that be okay? Todd, have you had an opportunity to speak with a lender? With your permission, I'd at least like to introduce you to my lender, a very brief phone call during our time together, just for you two to say hello and make a commitment for further conversation later. Would that be okay? Right? And so that's you actually taking a task off the buyer's plate and putting the task on the buyer's plate. 9 times out of 10, most of what we do from a communication standpoint is we leave it up to the buyer every time to go and find a lender, right? Most of the time, we'll say, hey, you go do this thing. The buyer's already overwhelmed, so the buyer stalls. The buyer continually delays, even if they're super excited. Have you talked to a lender yet? Oh, I was going to, I had this. Or, the gathering of documentation and paperwork. That's an endless process. How many of you have had conversations with either a lender you've recommended or the buyer's lender to where it's like, yeah, I'm just waiting on this from the buyer. I'm just waiting on this from the buyer. I'm just waiting, period, right? And that's, again, addressing the buyer's anxiety. The pattern interview is designed to reduce anxiety for everybody involved. You do that historical section where you find out about the buyer. You find out a little bit more about the buying power of the buyer. I like to use a line or a script that says, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'd hate to take you out, show you something, have you fall in love with it, only to find out it's not within your budget. That would be disastrous for both of us, wouldn't it? And by the way, things that I add at the end, wouldn't it, shouldn't we, couldn't that be, do you agree? Those are what's called tie downs. So if you're familiar with scripting, tie downs are meant to further the authorization of a commitment. That's why we do that. Hey, the sky is blue today, isn't it? Yes, that's a tie down. It gets you into an affirmative agreement to where you're saying, oh yeah, I agree with this, I agree with this, I agree with this. And again, it's designed to help remove anxiety and further the commitment. In that pattern interview, you're also telling them based on the information, because you're getting them to dream big. Has anybody ever heard of away from pain towards pleasure? We do it both in a listing agreement and on the buy side behavior. Part of that information gathering from the buy side is, if they don't own now, what are they in? How long have they been in that? What do they find comforting about renting versus buying? Is there any hesitation if you were to find the absolute perfect property tomorrow that would prevent them from buying, right? You're again removing any and all barriers, because that's the shell of your accountability framework. You're removing obstacles and barriers so that at the end, if there's a problem, once you start looking, you can say, well, wait a minute, Todd, when we met, we both agreed to this. You told me you were looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,200 square foot in the Parkmont district of whatever town, no older than this, near XYZ school. You needed it to be in a neighborhood that was walking to shopping or whatever, right? You're outlining everything that you discussed in your initial consultation with that buyer, so that that buyer can say, oh yeah, you're right. That is, by the way, why I don't agree with the auto send, the drip campaigns of properties, is because it doesn't allow you to isolate and hold accountability. Because the filtering system in most drip campaigns is imperfect, you have properties that are not within the buyer's purview slipping through. You know, they're looking for a single story, but that 2-bedroom slipped in because, you know, of whatever description or whatever algorithm it used to push information. So it sometimes is imperfect. A more succinct or more effective way, and this also helps you to get the buyer into closing behavior, is to tell them, based on the information that you've shared with me, I'm going to begin to send you properties. I'm only going to send you 3. I'm going to filter down to the best use cases as described by you when you gave me a description of what you're looking for. I'll have you drive by, look at the exterior of all 3. We'll make an appointment to see the interior the following day and make a decision on one. And you're really giving the buyer those kinds of cues, because if you left up to them, they're going to go, no, not quite right. And trust me, there's nothing you'll ever say that will convince someone to buy something that they don't feel or fall in love with. But you are helping to outline what the potentials of something could be. There are oftentimes something matches the exact criteria of the buyer, but the buyer lacks vision, which is a lot of people, right? There's no paint on the wall. The carpet looks crappy. You know, the kitchen may not be updated. The yard needs a little TLC, you know, all the above. So the buyer looks at it, and the buyer is looking for, most of the time, a ready-made, out of the box, let me put my stuff over here kind of property. And, you know, sometimes we just don't run into that, but all of the meat and bones of the property are more than enough to match what the buyer's criteria is. We have to help them dream and dream big about how they're going to move in. So I started to mention away from pain and towards pleasure as we start to communicate with a buyer. When they're in a rental situation, we want to push the cons of the rental. That's the pain, because that's the whole reason they're in front of you. They know you're a real estate professional. They're interested in buying. Again, we need to give them enough information to make an informed decision. So then we start to really talk about the situation they're in. Oh, you're still at your mother's house or your parents' house. You know, how is that? You know, oh, it's quite comfortable. Do you have plans on growing a family, or, you know, creating a level of independence beyond your parents? Asking them questions about what that experience may look like. Some may tell you no, and, you know, in which case your next question should be, then why are you talking to me? And that may help you understand if that buyer is looking to buy from an investment strategy or whatever. But, you know, again, it's all about questioning. Questions. Let me get as much data as I possibly can. And then when we start to close out that conversation and we're starting to push towards pleasure, which is, let's get you into that 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And by the way, 3-bedroom, 2-bath is not enough of a descriptive term or language for you to begin work. Anything can be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, right? It's a big bedroom. I like to use the room I'm in if I'm meeting with a buyer face to face. Would you say you want a bedroom the size of this room? Oh, no, this is way too big. Or you start to ask questions about what they're in now, because they could give you descriptive language like, I want a big house. Well, what's the size of property that you're in right now? Oh, 800 square feet. So big to them may translate to 1,000 square feet, because it's 200 square feet larger than what they have. So that may translate as big, not 3,500 square feet. So I think you guys get the general theme. It's all about asking questions. And then finally, the summation is, now that we've had a chance to get to know each other a bit, and I've gotten lots of information about what you're looking for, is there anything that would prevent you from working with me today? Right? And that gets an affirmative. Either, yeah, I really like you, D, or no, I think you're kind of a jerk, or your overall look just doesn't appeal to me, so I'm going to find somebody else, or whatever, right? But it gives an opportunity for a commitment to happen. Is there anything that would prevent us from working together today? No, I think we could work together. Let me explain to you how I work, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. These are the things that I'm going to do for you. These are the things that I expect from you in order to facilitate a successful closing for you and your new property. Does that make sense? Again, does that make sense is another tie down. Yes, that makes sense. Now you start to talk about the money. Because of the nature in which I work, and you and I are committed to one another, I ask that we are able to work together for this period of time. Today is the 25th of April. I anticipate it may take us approximately 2.5 months to find your ideal property and close successfully. So I'm asked that period of time to be able to work with you. At any time during our working relationship, I'm doing something that you don't agree with, please share that with me. With your permission, I'll do the same. We're going to hold each other mutually accountable, and this is how I'm compensated, right? And then you begin the financial conversation. Does this make sense to everybody so far? Anybody have any objections, concerns, comments that they'd like to add to this? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. And when you were mentioning bedrooms, another question I always like to bring up is I like to ask them what the bedrooms are for, because that always illuminates like what their motives are behind.
100%.
It's a lot different when somebody comes in and they're going to breed puppies in a bedroom versus, whatever. So.
1,000%. Yeah, absolutely. Like me, obviously the room I'm in is a home office, but it's a bedroom. It was designed for a bedroom, but I'm using it as a home office. So absolutely. That's part of that historical perspective of really understanding that person, because after all, that's how we create relationships, right? When you meet somebody interpersonally and you're curious about them, hey, can we have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, drink, coffee, whatever, because that's designed for an opportunity at a meeting so you can get to know them and they can get to know you. So it's the exact same creation of any relationship that you're defining with a buyer, except you're maintaining the professional distance between you and the buyer. I've also had agents push back on that in regards to the professional relationship, because a professional relationship is friendly, not friends. And I've had agents tell me over and over again, oh my God, some of my best friends are my past clients. That may work for you, but again, I'm really friendly with my doctor, but my doctor and I aren't friends, right? They're not part of my interpersonal world. They're a service provider to me for when I have ails. Could I be friends with my doctor? Sure, absolutely. But just keeping in mind what the dynamics of the relationship are meant to be. Not telling you not to be friends, but it's more friendly than friends. So anything else to add as we move on? So I started to address this the other day, which is some of the things that we struggle with are how do we define what we actually do for a buyer, particularly with legacy buyers that are going to go, oh, hell no, I'm not paying you. What's this all about? It's usually monies that come from the seller. Why do I have to pay you? I don't have the money to pay you. Where am I going to come up with funds? Some of us are working with buyers that are already marginal. In other words, they're stretched thin. They're pulling every nickel from everywhere they can just to come up with the down payment and the closing costs. Now there's the added wrinkle of, and I got to pay you too. Keep in mind that NAR is in contact with the National Mortgage Association to talk about some remedies that could exist. One thing that several brokers and I talked about last week is the potential of the possibility of a short-term loan that's rolled in like a wrap into the lending process. So that way it's not amortized over 30, it's amortized more like over 2, things like that. So there are some options of how this may be accomplished, how this may be achieved. I think all of you know that full transparency is necessary on both sides, particularly from the seller side. We must make the seller aware of any compensation given to the buyer representative. And again, as we start to look at language or adjustments in language, we still say listing agent, buyer's agent, that kind of thing, or we should start to make adjustments in terms of seller representative and buyer representative, which is more of a true and accurate depiction of what we actually do. I'm representing the buyer, solely representing the buyer, or I'm representing the seller, or solely representing the seller. It gives a more true depiction. It allows for the introduction of finances or financial arrangements within that relationship. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, doesn't it make sense that you have someone that represents your interest solely to get the best outcome, which is why the buyer's paying you? And that should be again, a way of introducing the money into the conversation. I'll do a more detailed dive into scripting, or some scripting language around how we can introduce getting paid and what all that looks like. And then also letting the buyer know, as we're talking about money, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I don't get paid until I find you a house and we successfully close. Does that make sense? That's a way of reducing the anxiety, because like, if we don't find anything, I don't owe you any money, right? There's no upfront. There's also the possibility of we do hourly. Although there was a company in LA in 2016 that did an hourly service. And what was found, of course, was, doing it hourly is far more expensive than a percentage. There's also an option of flat fee for my services, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. This is what I charge. A common objection that, a few agents have told me, which is, you hardly do anything. Gosh, you let me in and you do a little paperwork. I could do that, things like that. Yeah, you think you could, but the reality isn't. Of course, you don't want to say that. But more specifically, what if you just handed a buyer a pack of forms and said, all right, for these forms, I'm going to charge you $1,000. Have at it. How many buyers do you think would take you up on that event? Probably none of them, right? Because it's far more complicated than that. Just the level of liability and risk alone is far greater than what they can imagine or what they can anticipate. So one thing that NAR put out, which was 105 ways agents who are realtors are worth every penny of their compensation. Again, as I said the other day, many of you feel that we do exactly what I just described. Yeah, man, I made all this money and I hardly did anything for this money. I showed them a couple properties. This was the easiest buyer I've ever had. Contract went smoothly and we're off to the bank. We're thinking yippee skippy. Yes, it is great to have a free and easy transaction, because Lord knows we have enough of the difficult ones to last us a lifetime, right? Most of the time, transactions don't go smoothly, either being a difficult relationship with the other party or the other agent, or, problems with the property itself, right? 9 times out of 10, we don't run across those smooth and easy. We always have a wrinkle in one. So we relish when we have the ones that literally seems like yesterday I just put this thing in the contract. Now it's closing today. I'm going to use this as a natural stopping point, and then just field some questions and get some additional information from you guys. What are some of the pain points that you can anticipate or that you're feeling right now?
I'm curious on how many listing, what to expect on what listing agents will be offering. I mean, what what you'll see offered in listings as far as compensation. So, because I know like when I'm shopping California real estate, they'll put in their buyer's agent compensation amount or whatever. So
Right.
is it just flat, like sellers aren't going to be offering a buyer's agent commission, or it's their choice to or not?
It's their choice to, so as all of you know, commission or compensation can't be communicated in the multiple listing service in any way, shape, or form. It can be communicated on your website, any other medium other than the multiple listing service. That being said, it's going to depend on the sophistication of the listing agent. That's why I said everybody will be up-leveling their skills. There are listing agents that couldn't negotiate their way out of a paper bag. And I don't mean that to be mean, but I think we all know at least one or two of those types of agents, to where the minute they hit the seller and the seller throws up the simplest of objections, they're like, okay, if you do it today, I'll do the whole thing for 2%, right? Because, the negotiation, there's an old adage that you haven't begun to work until you receive your first objection. Right. Otherwise we'd be just great order takers. Our job starts with an objection. And so those that struggle with the process of negotiation will struggle with how to have a conversation with their sellers about Mr. and Mrs. Seller while this new event has taken place, because commissions have always been negotiable. Yes, it's true that you may not have to compensate a buyer representative in the work that they've done to bring a buyer to the property so that we can move this property forward. But by not paying, I believe that that's going to reduce the amount of eyeballs that we have on your property. Even though that's not how it should be presented, that's effectively what we'll be communicating. Because again, the minute we establish agency, irrespective of compensation, we're required to show any and all properties to that particular person that we're working with until the relationship is terminated. So that's why I said be very mindful of how you introduce yourself to buyers and how you're developing those relationships. Because the minute you start answering ad hoc questions, in other words, I'd like to see 1, 2, 3, 4 Main Street, you've already committed yourself and you've had no conversation of compensation. So kind of the same is true on the sell side, is having those conversations about, yes, the seller may have options to not compensate, but here's what could happen if the seller chooses not to effectively market the property. And that's the language that should be adjusted as well, is we don't list a home. Listing a home does nothing. I put a sign out in the yard and I played the waiting game. If it's not priced right, if it's not effectively marketed, the property's going to sit. It's not going to sell. We're marketing a home to where we're putting lots of skill and effort into how that property's marketed, the visibility, the pricing structure, all the above. We're doing all of those little things that make sure that the property moves off the market in a timely manner. That's marketing versus listing. I'm sure we've all seen those listings that are so priced out of control that, it'll never sell at that price. And those are the two factors why a property doesn't sell. Normally it's condition or it's price. If a property is priced accurately, even if the condition is poor, it will sell, right? If it's priced too high and the condition is poor, it won't sell. So there's only really two factors why a property doesn't sell. Other questions, other comments?
I wanted to add something.
Sure.
Excuse me. I came in the industry through a mortgage broker. I'm the lender.
Okay.
And I've been the lender I've been a mortgage broker for 30 years now.
Got it.
We had to deal with the compensation issue after 2008 and
I remember
all the
that.
changes.
Yeah.
So we had to disclose our commission. And what was interesting about it is now our commission is fixed. So it doesn't matter which loan program. And reality, I ended up making more money because we didn't know what we're going to do. So we upped up the commission number that before. I was the last one to get paid. If I needed to close a deal, I would take it out of my commission.
Got it.
But now we can't do that.
Yeah.
And so in the end, even though it was very painful and we had to have these conversations with our clients, and oh my gosh, you know, they look at the closing statement, the loan estimate, you see what we get compensated. Now, most of the time we do lender paid, so it's not paid by them.
Yeah.
But you still have to have a conversation about, oh, how come you're making this kind of money?
Right. Yeah. And you said you're making more money. How did you find the adjustment? And, you know, how are you accommodating that now? You said you're making more money. And obviously you've been doing it for a minute, so it's gotten easier. What helped in the transition?
Well, we were normally working for about a point. That's how
Yeah.
we were working with A-paper clients. They could go anywhere they wanted. So we kind of would work, and we did volume versus working hard in each loan.
Yeah.
And then when this TRID came out, we went from a point to a point and a half because we didn't know, you know, what we're going to have to do. And then that became our standard. And so we were making more money for each loan.
Got it. Yeah. You know, like I said, it seems daunting at first, but nothing but upside when you look at the opportunities that are being presented. And I truly think that what we're experiencing as far as change is a good thing. I mean, there's a glut, just like after the last market that Todd was talking about. If you were in the industry from, I'm going to say, around 2003 to 2006 or 7, and Todd's been in it for 30 years, so, you know, he gets it. There were lots of criminals, you know, and I just can't even pick another word. There were just straight up criminals, you know, that were robbing you without a gun or without strong arming you per se. And it was awful to me. It was just the worst experience dealing with a practitioner on the other side that you were just going, yeah, you're kind of a scumbag. You know what I mean? It was lots of collateral folks in the industry, appraisers, lenders, realtors. It was a license to print money, and, you know, things that should have never happened were happening. And when the market subsequently crashed, and then changes were afoot everywhere, went from a conditional license to 3 courses, and lots of legislative and oversight changes happened, it washed away all of the bad actors. I mean, the reason I say criminal is because people went to jail. I mean, I'm talking about federal prison. So those bad actors were washed away, and then the cream rose, and then you had, you know, these practitioners who understood that this is a business and a career and not just a fly-by-night way of making money. And I'm not saying that there are people like that in the industry now, but what I am saying is that because there is no required education beyond getting your license and practicing, most people follow the herd mentality. So they're looking over going, oh, so-and-so's doing this, I guess I should be doing this, without actually taking the time to educate and understand the business in which we're in. It's going to wash away a number of those bodies too, because the truth is they're already marginal. They're already struggling to just kind of get a breath, right? You know, they're treading water, but unfortunately the water line is here. So, you know, I think it's going to be a good opportunity for the business to make some self-correction. Guys, I've gone over. I apologize. As always, I appreciate your time. Let me spend some time with you. You know, if you have any questions or concerns, definitely reach out to Ela. She'll share those. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Dee. Have a great day.
You too.